So welcome to Media Talks here at NAB 2019. Now we're going to be talking about EIDR and identifiers and magic numbers and how to bind the world together so that you can search it and audit it. We have here Ben Schofield, who's representing EIDR. Welcome, Ben.
Hi.
So what is an EIDR, Ben?
Well, EIDR stands for the Entertainment Identifier Registry, and it's basically a full set of all the content that's been registered by the major studios. There's something like 2 million pieces of content, and that's held at different levels.
So when you say content, what is that? Is that like a movie or a trailer or what does content mean in the EIDR context?
Think of it as film and TV, but also all the subsets of that. So trailers and promos, all the other clips. You can even register clips. So, but if I guess the best example of EIDR is the movie catalog of major studios, where 99.9% of the content is being registered.
Okay. So can I search for, I don't know, Fifth Element, my favorite movie? If I type that into a search bar, could I find an EIDR?
Yeah, it's very easy. I mean, you can actually, it's free to use the UI. You can go and search, so you can type in the names. It's not the best UI, it's something like 10 years old now, but it's still functional.
Heritage UI.
Yeah.
So we can search for EIDRs, but once we've got that magic number, I mean, why is it important? Why, if all the studios are so keen on it, why have they even bothered?
Well, it's probably quite a good idea to just go back in time and think about the different silos of workflows that people have. And there may be different identifiers that don't persist across those silos. So, for example, Warner Brothers have got 9 separate metadata systems that they've aggregated together over time. And the only thing linking them together is an EIDR ID. So what they do is they take the IDs from each of their legacy systems, register them in what's called an alt ID, and that enables them to map back to another system.
So EIDR's like the sort of global super ID that you can find the other IDs from, and that binds together other MAM systems?
The way I describe it is metadata dial tone. So think of it today, if you pick up a telephone, take an iPhone here, you dial to a number in Brazil. That may traverse a Huawei switch, a Nokia switch, an Ericsson switch, and ring an old telephone, a 1970s analog telephone in Brazil. You don't have to care about those intermediate systems, but the telephone number persists across them. So think of EIDR as really the global telephone number for content.
Okay, so we're here at Dalet, one of the biggest MAM systems or MAM vendors that exist in the industry. So for them, does an EIDR associate with a title or a version of a title? What's the right mental concept of an EIDR?
So one of the other good things about EIDR, it's been really battle tested. It's had 10 years being kicked around by a wide variety of different studios, different content owners, from very small to very large. So we're pretty confident that any corner case that's come up has been through the model, and the ontology that was originally put together is very robust. So it's for television, it is a series, a season, an episode, and an edit. And that's a hierarchy, and it's an EIDR is actually an abstract number. So one of the problems with other IDs is that people make them meaningful. So you might have the name of the studio, the name of the series, the episode number, and then what happens is operations people make the mistake of thinking they can just amend that number. They go from version 1 to version 2. The only problem is that them and their colleague have both done that, so now you have the same ID, you have an ID clash. So in real terms, what you want to do is have a central registry with an abstract number that's meaningless, and the only way of establishing what that number refers to is to look it up in the registry.
Okay, so do people put EIDRs inside content, or do they live in databases? What's the use of EIDR nowadays?
So, I mean, originally the intent was to try and improve the supply chain. And what the studio's first intent was to say, it's crazy that every time we hand a piece of content over to somebody in downstream in post-production, that they need to traffic that. So there are endless spreadsheets, labels written on tapes. Now this unique identifier enables us to establish we can forensically track that through all the different workflows. So the first thing was supply chain efficiency, but it also has implications in the digital world for measurement. So if you can track the content and all the versions of that content against an audience, you can then roll that up.
And so there's some work that took place in SMPTE where EIDRs can be actually embedded in a distribution stream to be used in audience measurements. So does this mean that we can use EIDRs to track things like how much it costs to make a version and how much people saw it?
So you need 3 IDs for that. You need the service ID, so what the broadcaster, what channel was being broadcast. You need the content ID that was being broadcast at the time. And then what people tend to do is also have an ad ID, and absolutely the OBID spec allows you to, open binding of IDs allows you to pull those together and using an audio watermark determine exactly what was played out when in the context of which content.
So EIDR is particularly popular amongst the IMF community. Do you want to say a little bit about how IMF and EIDR work together?
And I think it's probably worth, hopefully it's not too technical, but looking at the UUIDs that describe every package.
Those are the magic numbers that are generated by the products themselves.
So the IMF is a container format, and so to make sure there's integrity on the format, you have a number that if anything changes within that package, that number cycles around as well. And similarly, it's a component-based architecture, so every component has its own ID. And they're great, they're very robust. It's a very robust way of maintaining data integrity. They're locally consistent and globally unique, but they have no context in a business workflow. And so this is where EIDR is important. It has context in a business workflow. So an example of that would be Entertainment Merchants Association, who provide the avails to someone like Google. So you millions of rows of spreadsheet or XML, that each of which is an offer of a different version of a piece of content. Google decide which ones they need to buy, and they can then automatically round trip that back to Warner Brothers for measurement and for payaways of talent.
So that means that you're absolutely certain of which version of which content you're going to be getting when you buy the thing, but also you've got an audit trail all the way through to paying people upstream and gathering money downstream.
Absolutely.
That sounds like absolute magic. Why haven't we had this before?
It's tougher than you think, because I think if you look in the standards world, when everyone starts to look now for a content ID, they refer back to EIDR. So I have a great spider diagram that shows EIDR at the center and all these other related standards going around it. But being correct technically and winning that architectural argument doesn't mean you've won over all the commercial and legal people and not necessarily the operations people. So as always, these things take time to persist through the studios. So that's really the next phase of EIDR, is to try and make that business case very strong so commercial and legal people drive it out through operations.
Interesting. So the EIDR value itself doesn't replace like a house ID or a MAM ID. Those are kind of local numbers for local management, but it gives you some context that number means something in a global context. Is that right? It's
a common misconception. And one of the barriers that technologists often throw up is we've already got good numbers, why do we need another one? And they're good numbers in the context of their own silo, they're part of the workflow, but they're not good across the workflow. And so the idea here is that EIDR doesn't replace those numbers. What the alt IDs, which is all the related IDs that go with it, allow you to register your other production, locally important production numbers, and then use that as a lookup.
So I'm guessing as we migrate more to the cloud and we have one version of something living somewhere nefarious up in the sky, EIDR will become even more important, because it doesn't matter whether it's subsidiary A of company X or subsidiary B, that EIDR will always be part of this thing that you put up in the cloud, because it's a global thing, presumably.
So EIDR is very strong in movies, less strong in TV, and a lot of that's been down to the TV infrastructure. Okay. But I think that TV infrastructure, especially in the US, is about to get hit by a perfect storm. And that perfect storm is ATSC3, with addressable advertising. It's the race to the cloud, where I've heard major US broadcasters apologizing it's going to take them 2 years. And also the shift in viewing to a range of different devices. So all those things suggest there's going to be an upheaval in the infrastructure and some changes. So this is a good time to have that efficient automation. And it's also interesting to contrast the economics of linear television and linear advertising, which has always driven a very high premium architecture. So people have been somewhat insulated from the real world. When you go to the other end of the digital side, someone like a Google has to automate, has to do it at low cost. But going back to the beam counters, the commercial types, we'll look at the two different costs for the same thing and say, I'd rather have the digital price than the linear price.
Interesting. So it looks like EIDR's going to have a very rosy future.
I mean, today it's almost a 10-year anniversary. We've got 2 million IDs registered. We've got 4 million alt IDs. So some pieces of content have got 59 alternative IDs. But I think we've still got a lot to go. I think in the US we're very strong. In the UK, you've got major broadcasters like ITV who've done it end to end. Right. The British Film Institute have registered it, but we do, and the BBFC, who are the equivalent to the MPAA in the States, the ratings agency, are building the new systems around it. So we're seeing a lot of interest, but that doesn't mean we've finished yet.
Excellent. Still lots of work to do. The world's still a big place.
Yes.
Excellent. Ben, thank you very much for talking to us. This was Media Talks at NAB 2019.